Um, I would like to talk about one of my many brothers, Forgotten Roots. Um, in 2017, I had what I called my first mystical experience by recognizing my mind in the mind of another. And this is an experience of the infinite. To be yourself outside of yourself is to be infinite. And I talked through YouTube comments with Forgotten Roots. I followed his channel, which has been deleted since. And we talked about, or around, the full moon. We talked about Nietzsche, poetry. We spoke in Latin. We talked about pre-World War II books, which were made available on the internet. For instance, Madison Grant, Lothrop Stoddard. And we gravitated towards and around the Thulian perspective. That's where I met him. And yeah. And I considered him as a spiritual teacher and a spiritual brother, and I had uh, spiritual experiences with him. I felt connected to him. And many years later, I know myself to be what Hegel calls reason, and also to be the negative. And I had discovered Forgotten Roots after having gone through what I call the phenomenology of the European mind, which becomes the phenomenology of the European spirit, which becomes the phenomenology of spirit beyond European and non-European, just spirit. And we had in common the fact that we had gone through the right-wing mindset. We had become disillusioned about modern Western world. We had gone through the pagan phase, and he became interested in ancient spirituality. Um, yeah, and I would like to make a few remarks about the beginning of his book, which I had bought in 2019 when I was trying to reveal reason to the world, and I failed. And now, almost 3 years later, I am attempting the same thing, but I have grown up and spiritually matured in between, so I understand why it was not the moment in 2019. And he says that the modern world is a sad place for the European spirit. And I had understood that because um, the mood that we find in modern, some portions of the modern European youth, the gothic teenagers with their suicidal mood, their love of darkness and sadness and nostalgia and melancholia, and which we find expressed in rock bands like Evanescence or Green Day, some of their songs, or hard rock groups. This very sad mood, and I understood that it was the manifestation of the European spirit, and all the gothic or goth, I don't know how it is in English, but the young Europeans, white kids who dye their hair dark and wear all dark clothes and are always in a state of sadness in suicidal mood. They are the romantics of end of the 18th century and beginning of 19th century, made manifest in the modern conditions of 21st century European and Western life. So I had understood that. And I would like to comment about some passages just at the beginning, because yeah, he says that the modern world lacks higher ideals, and he wants to examine these issues and explain the current spiritual crisis. And that the modern man has been severed from his own cultural and spiritual roots, and he believes that he needs to return to the old ways, the tradition. And his book is rooted and influenced by the Indo-European philosophy, but he says that he does not defend any political ideology. He has evolved beyond politics, and anyone is welcome to read his essay, and that is a very profound book. I've not read it completely, but I already know that it contains very deep truths and very profound ideas. And the great Hegelian irony of our day is that the most profound and spiritual people are not necessarily found within the classical formal educational system, but those who build and shape and construct their own knowledge for themselves are those who are the most spiritual, and in a way they are the closest to spirit, at first at least, because the modern educational system has been built precisely to negate spiritual teachings, and those who have the courage, or those who to whom the circumstances are such that they are forced to learn philosophy or spirituality on their own, those who travel alone and sometimes most of the time against the currents of modern thought, and who struggle in an individual quest for knowledge and understanding and liberation, they are rewarded. And those who complete their PhD or their I don't know how you call it, the doctorate or bachelor's degree, they are rewarded because they earn money and social status and prestige, but their knowledge is kind of empty. So that's very Hegelian. He says that the poetic thread interwoven within the texts, he makes many quotes, many quotations to make the whole of his thinking into an interconnected, spiritualized, poetic totality. And he includes at the end of the book a list of recommended books, films, music, and visual artists. And he has understood this Hegelian idea that spirit is made manifest in art. And he quotes and lists ancient and modern artists, but none come from modern pop culture. And the only thing that I have understood more in a way for now than him is just that our spirit is to be thought, to be found and reflected upon in modern pop culture. But he quotes and lists modern movie makers and classical artists and historical artists and philosophers, and he's a very profound, very cultivated man, and I know that he had not had a formal education and training, that he learned and studied on his own, and that's why he's so intellectually developed. And we find this spiritual teaching that the far left and the far right coincide in their view of nature, that the far right have a spiritual view of nature, and they seek to be in close contact and in a spiritual relationship with nature. So they want to promote an ecological view of nature, and that we find this in the pagan community, the right-wing pagan communities, and the ecological leftists, who do not simply claim that we should defend nature and save the environment, but those who live and are in close contact with nature. They are much more subtle and right-wing in a way than what might appear at first glance, because they understand that nature is life, and in life there is death and violence and suffering, but it is worth preserving nonetheless. So in ecological spiritual leftist and spiritual right-wing ecologist, they find the same truth, and they are not as different as it may appear at first sight. And this unity of opposites is spirituality itself. And yeah, I guess he's empirically he's a Pole. He comes from Poland, and I guess that he knows about Fyodor Kaczynski and his book against modern industrial society, and he knew about the Thulan perspective, and it has a cultural reflection in the movie Into the Wild. Into the Wild is a leftist from a bourgeois American family which chooses to live a full life in contact with nature, and to live his thought, and to think his life, and to go into the wild, and to confront the natural world, and to be molded into the exuberant and fully living aspect of nature. And he's beyond left and right. That's a Nietzschean figure, a Nietzschean character. His unity with the wilderness and the inherent life, and the intensity of life in primordial conditions. And there's another movie, I don't remember the name, I think it's Captain Fantastic, I'm not sure, it's the movie with Viggo Mortensen. It's a leftist family of white Aryans who have many children, I think 5 or 6 or maybe 7 children, and they decide to train them and to educate them into the wilderness, into primitive conditions of life, and to separate them from the conditions of modernity. And that's a very deep movie, and the leftists who choose to live a natural life, those leftist couples who decide to live in primitive conditions, they are the ones who have the more white children, and they perpetuate the white race without even being conscious of having a white identity as such. So that's a dialectical irony. So yeah, I will stop there for now. I will make a second video.